his wife told everyone he was broke. Not in one conversation, not in one room, but in every room she entered over 8 years of marriage, in the particular way a woman who has decided what a man is worth communicates that decision without ever needing to say the number out loud. A pause before she answered questions about his work. A pivot when the follow-up came, a single word, comfortable, delivered with a smile that closed the subject permanently. And the people in her life heard it, absorbed it, and treated him accordingly. Her mother, her producer, her 60 closest friends at a rooftop birthday party where she stood at a microphone and thanked everyone who had pushed her to stop shrinking, while he stood 12 feet away holding a glass of sparkling water and said absolutely nothing. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the quiet man they had written off had spent 8 years building something worth $67 million in plain sight in the same apartment, behind a closed office door they never once thought to ask about. And then one morning she opened Forbes magazine and saw his face on the cover. What happens when the man you spent nearly a decade dismissing turns out to own the ground you've been standing on? Stay with me, because this one does not let up. If this is your kind of story, hit that like button right now, subscribe so you never miss one, and drop your city in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're watching from today, and let me take you back to where this all started, to a rooftop on a Saturday night, a woman at a microphone, and a man who already knew exactly how it was going to end. The rooftop was the kind of beautiful that cost money to arrange. String lights ran the perimeter in perfect intervals, warm and even, the kind of lighting that made everyone look like the best version of themselves. Round tables with white linen, a bar cart stocked with things nobody ordered by accident. The Chicago skyline sat behind it all like a backdrop someone had hired, the South Loop glittering below in the August heat, and 60 people moved through the space with the practiced ease of an audience that knew they were also part of the show. Derek Okafor stood at the far end of the bar with a glass of sparkling water. He had been there for 40 minutes. He had spoken to 3 people. A greeting near the elevator, a nod at the bar, a brief exchange with a man he recognized from Camille's network, who had asked what he was working on, and accepted some research as a complete answer. Derek was good at being present without occupying space. He had spent years perfecting it. The party was Camille's in every detail. She had selected the venue, approved the florals, curated the playlist, and sent the invitations through a graphic designer whose aesthetic matched her Instagram grid within 2 shades. The caption she posted that morning, a close-up of the rooftop signage with the words "New Chapter, New Energy, New Standards" in the text, had 4,000 likes before the first guest arrived. Tasha had commented a crown emoji. Renee had commented, "My baby." Camille herself moved through the room like someone who had rehearsed casualness. She wore ivory, a choice, not an accident, and she touched shoulders and accepted compliments and laughed in the particular way people laugh when they know they are being watched and have decided they do not mind. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. Derek watched her from the bar and felt something very close to nothing. The toasts began just after 9. Tasha went first, which was appropriate, because Tasha always went first. She talked about Camille's journey and her courage and her refusal to accept less than she deserved, and the room responded with the warm noise of people who agreed before they heard the sentence finished. Renee sat at the center table in a mauve dress with her hands folded, nodding at measured intervals, the way a woman nods when she is not surprised because she already knew. Then Camille took the microphone. She thanked the room, she thanked her mother, she thanked Tasha, she thanked the women who had poured into her, and the moments that had forced her to grow. She talked about alignment, she talked about frequency. She said, with the steady cadence of something rehearsed into naturalness, that she had spent too many years shrinking herself to fit a space that was never built for her, and that 38 felt like the first year she had decided to stop apologizing for her own standards. She did not say Derek's name. She did not look in his direction. She did not need to. The room did it for her. Eyes moved toward him in the brief, involuntary way. Eyes moved toward the thing a speaker has carefully avoided. Quick glances calibrated away, the social math of 60 people calculating the same sum at the same moment. A woman near the bar pressed her lips together. A man in a blue blazer studied his drink. Renee kept her hands folded and her eyes on her daughter, and did not look at Derek at all, which was its own kind of eloquence. Derek took the last swallow of his sparkling water. He set the glass on the bar rail with one quiet click. He straightened his jacket. He did not find Camille's eyes. He did not look for a face that might offer him something. He walked to the elevator at the same pace a man walks to his car at the end of a long and ordinary day, pressed the button, and when the doors opened, he stepped inside and turned around and watched the rooftop recede without expression. The lobby of the building was air-conditioned and still. Derek walked through it toward the exit. Near the door, a magazine display rack held a rotating selection of current issues: business, lifestyle, local interest. He passed it without slowing. He had already seen what was in it. He had been looking at it for 3 weeks. The apartment was dark when he got home. He did not turn on the living room lights. He moved through the space with the ease of a man who knew every corner of it. Past the kitchen, past the hallway, past the bookshelf, Camille had spent 2 Saturdays arranging until the spines formed a color gradient she had photographed for her grid. He stopped at that shelf for only a moment. He reached into the bag he was carrying and removed a magazine, thick and flat and heavy with significance, and he set it against the books at eye level, open to the first page of a particular article, the way you might leave something you want someone to find. Then he walked to his office. The legal pad on his desk sat where it always sat, covered in 8 years of handwriting, columns and projections and revenue models dense enough that a person who didn't know what they were looking at would see nothing but numbers. He did not open it. He had not needed to in some time. He sat down in his chair in the dark. He did not turn the light on. Outside, 60 people were still on a rooftop toasting a new chapter. And Derek Okafor sat in the quiet he had built, in the dark he had chosen, and waited for morning to do what morning was going to do. To understand why he waited with such stillness, you have to go back to the beginning. They met at a rooftop gathering, which felt, later, like something the universe had arranged for its own private reasons. It was a mutual friend's birthday, 3 floors above a Bronzeville wine bar, and Derek had been standing near the railing watching the city when Camille walked over and asked him what he was looking at. He said, "The grid." She said she had always loved how Chicago laid itself out like it had nothing to hide. They talked for 2 hours. He walked her to her car. He called her the next morning, which she later told Tasha was the thing that decided it. Not the conversation, but the promptness. A man who calls when he says he will, she said, is a man who means what he says. They were married 14 months later in a small ceremony in Hyde Park. 60 guests, her mother in the front row in cream, Derek's side, quieter but steady. The reception had a live band that played Earth, Wind and Fire until the venue closed them down. Derek danced exactly once with Camille and held her like he was in no hurry for the song to end. The first 2 years were good. Derek worked from home, which Camille accepted without much thought in the beginning. He kept early hours. She would wake at 6:30, to find his office door already closed, the thin line of light at the bottom the only evidence he was there. He drank his coffee black, ate breakfast standing at the counter reading, and spoke little until late morning. He filled legal pads with handwriting she never deciphered, columns, projections, arrows connecting numbers to other numbers. She assumed it was freelance work. He never corrected the assumption. Camille's career in those same years was building its own momentum. She had joined the network as a lifestyle contributor 2 years before they married, but the segment that would define her, Money Moves with Camille, launched in year 2 of the marriage and found its audience faster than anyone at the network predicted. The premise was simple: financial empowerment translated into language regular people could absorb, delivered by a woman who made it look effortless. Viewers responded, followers accumulated. Her face appeared on the network's promotional materials, then on transit ads along the Red Line, then on a billboard near the expressway that Renee photographed from her car and sent to everyone in her contacts. Tasha Price came with the segment's growth. She was a senior producer who operated with the conviction that her job was not simply to make Camille's work better, but to make Camille's world smaller, curated, affirmed, protected from friction. She was good at it. She told Camille what she wanted to hear with enough variation to sound like analysis. She was the first call Camille made with good news, and the first call she made with bad. Within 18 months of the segment's launch, Tasha had become the architecture of Camille's professional confidence. The shift in how Camille described Derek happened so gradually that there was no single moment to point to. In the first year, she introduced him by name and occupation. Derek, he's a writer. In the second year, the occupation softened to he does some freelance work. By the third year, she had developed a particular pivot. Someone would ask a follow-up question about what he wrote, and Camille would smile and say something like, "Oh, he keeps to himself about it," and then redirect the conversation towards something else before the silence had time to settle into awkwardness. The pivot was smooth. She had practiced it without knowing she was practicing it. Renee noticed the space and moved into it. She was not a cruel woman in the obvious sense. She had raised Camille with discipline and ambition, and a precise understanding of what a man's value to a household was supposed to look like. She asked Derek questions at Sunday dinners with the warmth of genuine interest. How were things going? Did he have anything coming up? Had he thought about the corporate space? The questions were never hostile. They were, however, relentless, and they were always asked in the presence of others, and they were always framed around the word plans. She never said she doubted him. She never had to. It was in the third year of the marriage that Camille found the legal pad. She had gone into Derek's office to retrieve a phone charger and noticed the pad open on the desk, covered front to back in dense handwriting. She looked at it without touching it. Subscriber acquisition models in one column, retention projections in another, revenue scenarios stacked in tiers. 100,000, 500,000, 1 million. Numbers she didn't recognize attached to variables she didn't understand. She took out her phone and photographed the page. She sent it to Tasha with the caption, "My husband is out here spreadsheet dreaming LOL." Tasha replied with 3 crying laughing emojis. Camille set her phone down and found the charger and left the office. She did not mention the legal pad to Derek. It had not occurred to her that there was anything to mention. It was a dream written in columns, and she had married a man made of quiet and small ambitions, and that was the story she had decided was true, and so it was. Derek, behind his closed door, kept building. By year 5, his name had stopped being a subject at Renee's table. Not because the family had accepted him, but because the conversation had moved past him the way a river moves past a rock. It has decided to go around. not with hostility, just with the calm certainty that he was not the direction anyone was headed. He had become a punchline no one bothered to deliver out loud anymore. What none of them understood was that the silence was not emptiness, it was architecture. And it was almost finished. By year 6, Camille had stopped being a local personality and started being a brand. The distinction mattered to her in ways she could not always articulate, but always felt. A personality could be dismissed. A brand had infrastructure. She had the segment, the following, the speaking invitations, the partnership inquiries that arrived in her agent's inbox with increasing regularity. She had a voice coach she saw on Tuesdays and a media consultant she spoke with every other Thursday. She had developed, through years of careful cultivation, a public identity built on a single premise. She was a woman who understood money, and she was not afraid to tell other women what that understanding had cost her to acquire. The graphics that illustrated her financial segments were part of what made Money Moves work. 3 times per quarter, the show's production team received a package from a vendor called Margin Media LLC. 3 proprietary data visualizations, cleanly formatted, sourced to original research, precisely the kind of credible foundation that elevated a lifestyle segment into something that felt authoritative. The invoices at $8,400 per quarter were processed by Tasha's assistant, a young woman named Brianna, who filed them under production vendors without a second thought. Tasha had approved the vendor relationship 2.5 years earlier and had not revisited it since. Camille had never seen an invoice in her life. The graphics appeared in her segments. Her viewers praised them. She accepted the praise and moved forward. She did not know whose research she was standing on. Renee's behavior at Sunday dinners had shifted in those same years from implication to something closer to instruction. She set her table the same way she always had: pot roast in the center, greens on the left, cornbread in the cast iron she'd had since before Camille was born. But the conversation had developed a new architecture. She spoke now about presence, about men who showed up in ways that could be seen. She mentioned, with studied casualness, the husband of Camille's cousin Denise, who had just made partner at his firm. She mentioned the man her friend Gloria's daughter had married, who had recently purchased a house in Kenwood with a yard. She never said Derek's name in these comparisons. She never needed to. The shape of what she was saying was clear enough, and Camille sat across the table and absorbed it and said nothing to contradict it. The word comfortable had by then become the family's consensus on Derek Okafor. It was not spoken with malice anymore. It had graduated past malice into something worse: acceptance. He was comfortable. That was what he was. A sweet man, Renee would say, if pressed, in the tone of a woman identifying the single charitable thing available to say. Camille no longer corrected anyone who assumed Derek's income was modest or non-existent or dependent on hers. The correction would have required an explanation she did not have, and by year 6 she had stopped feeling the need to look for one. It was on a Tuesday evening in the 7th year that Derek overheard the phone call. He had come out of his office for water, and Camille was in the kitchen, her back to the hallway, her voice low and practiced, and carrying the particular cadence of a woman in a conversation she considered private. He heard Tasha's name on the other end. He recognized the tempo of Tasha's responses even through a speaker. He heard Camille say that she was thinking through some things, that she was trying to get clear on what she needed going forward. And then, in answer to a question he did not hear, he heard Camille say it. He's comfortable. You know how some men are. She did not say it with cruelty. That was the part that stayed with Derek long after the words had faded. There was no edge in it, no bitterness, no attempt to wound. It was said the way a woman states a weather condition, matter of fact, resigned, kind of thing you mention because it is simply true and everyone already knows it. Derek stood in the hallway for 2 seconds, then continued to the kitchen, filled his glass, and walked back to his office without a word. Camille did not hear him. She kept talking. 2 weeks later, the term sheet arrived. It came through Whitfield's office by secure document transfer on a Wednesday morning, a formal acquisition offer from Hargrove Media Group for the entirety of Margin Media LLC and its assets, including the margin and all associated intellectual property. The number at the top of the document was $67 million. Derek read the full document once, made 2 margin notes in pencil, and set it face down on the corner of his desk. Then he stood, walked out of his office, and went to the kitchen where Camille was making tea before her afternoon segment prep. He asked if she wanted him to pick up anything on his way back from a walk. She said no, she was fine. He nodded and went back inside. 3 Sundays later, at Renee's table with the pot roast and the greens and the cast-iron cornbread, Camille announced she was throwing herself a birthday party, a rooftop, 60 people, a new chapter. She described the venue with the excitement of a woman who had already decided what the evening was really for, even if she had not said it plainly. Renee listened with her hands folded and her eyes bright, and when Camille finished, she reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand and said it sounded like exactly what she needed. A fresh start, Renee said. Derek passed the cornbread and said nothing. 3 weeks later, he stood on that rooftop in his good jacket and watched Camille give her toast. And he already knew, had known for weeks, exactly what was coming the morning after. Pacing begins to accelerate from this chapter forward. The slow burn is over. The offices of Hargrove Media Group occupied the 31st floor of a building on North Michigan Avenue, and the conference room where Derek sat looked out over the lake with the kind of view that made everything below it seem manageable. He had been in this room 3 times over the past 4 months. Each visit had moved with more precision than the last. Today was the final one. James Whitfield sat to Derek's left, a leather portfolio open in front of him, a cup of coffee he had not touched at his elbow. Whitfield was the kind of attorney who prepared so thoroughly that meetings like this became formalities, not because he was careless, but because by the time he arrived at a table, every variable had already been addressed in a document somewhere. He had represented Derek since the early days of the margin, back when it was 60,000 subscribers and a holding company registered in Illinois with a single asset and no staff. He had watched it become what it was now. He had never once suggested Derek move faster than Derek wanted to move. Across the table, Hargrove's acquisition team confirmed the final terms: $67 million, full acquisition of Margin Media LLC and all its assets, the Margin newsletter, the research division, the subscriber database, the proprietary data architecture, the brand. 12 days from public announcement to close. The wire instructions had already been reviewed. The representations and warranties were clean. All that remained was Derek's signature on the final agreement, which was scheduled for the following week. Derek listened, asked 2 questions, and nodded. What he had built, quietly, behind a closed door, in the hours before Camille was awake and the hours after she was asleep, had become this. The Margin had launched 8 years ago as a newsletter covering black economic policy and wealth strategy, written by Derek alone, distributed to 412 subscribers who had found it through a single post on a financial literacy forum. He had never advertised it. He had never announced it. He had grown it the way he did everything, methodically, without noise, trusting the work to find the people it was meant to find. It had found 1.4 million of them. At $12 per month per subscriber, Margin Media LLC generated $4.8 million in annual recurring revenue. The research division, which had grown in the past 3 years into a separate operation, producing proprietary financial data and visualization packages, added another $400,000 annually in licensing fees. Whitfield had structured the entire company under the LLC from the beginning, registered in 2014, 2 years before Derek ever met Camille Fontaine at a rooftop party in Bronzeville. That registration date was the wall Camille's attorneys would eventually run into. Whitfield raised it himself as the Hargrove team stepped out to give them a moment. He set his pen down and looked at Derek directly and asked the question he had been holding for weeks. Derek had already decided. He told Whitfield he wanted the acquisition announced before any legal proceedings began. He wanted the Forbes issue to drop first. He wanted the public record to exist before any courtroom arguments about asset valuation could start, because he understood, as a man who had spent 8 years studying how information moves, that the sequence in which facts became known mattered enormously. Whitfield accepted this without comment. That was one of the things Derek had always valued about him. Then Whitfield opened a section of his due diligence file that he had flagged 3 days earlier and slid it across the table. He told Derek there was something in the vendor licensing records he should see. Derek looked at the page. It was a list of active licensing agreements held by Margin Media LLC's research division, companies and production entities currently paying quarterly fees for data visualization packages. The third entry on the list read, WLKN TV Production, Chicago, Money Moves with Camille, Vendor Contact, B. Simmons, $8,400 per quarter, active 26 months. Derek read it twice. He set the page down on the table and was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the lake was flat and silver in the afternoon light. He thought about the graphics that appeared in Camille's segment every week, the clean data visualizations her viewers praised, the research foundation that made her look like a woman who truly understood the numbers she was talking about. He thought about Tasha's assistant processing an invoice to Margin Media LLC without anyone ever asking who Margin Media LLC was or who owned it. He thought about Camille at her kitchen table, preparing segment notes, building her brand around financial intelligence, telling people she was a woman who understood money, on research that belonged to him. He picked the page back up, read it a third time, and set it down again. He told Whitfield to proceed on all fronts: acquisition, licensing, non-renewal, and divorce filing, in that order. Whitfield made 3 notes in his portfolio and closed it with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been waiting for exactly this instruction. The Forbes cover, titled The Quiet Architect, featuring a photograph of Derek in his home office, the lake visible through the window behind him, was confirmed to drop in 6 days. The piece detailed the full origin of the margin, the full structure of Margin Media LLC, the full valuation, and the full name of its founder. The home office address listed in the article was the same address as the apartment Camille had recently begun redecorating for her fresh start. Derek buttoned his jacket, thanked the Hargrove team when they returned, and shook hands around the table with the unhurried calm of a man who had nothing left to wait for. The order of operations was set. The Forbes issue would drop first, and everything else would follow in its wake. 2 days after the meeting at Hargrove, Derek sat across from Whitfield in his office on South Wacker, and they mapped it out with the precision of 2 men who understood that timing was not a detail, but a weapon. Whitfield had a yellow legal pad, not unlike the ones Derek filled in his own office, and he wrote the sequence in 4 clean lines as Derek spoke it back to him. Day 1, the Forbes issue drops. Day 3. Hargrove announces the acquisition publicly, triggering automatic media coverage across Chicago business press and national trade outlets. Day 3 also, Margin Media LLC's formal notice of licensing non-renewal reaches Camille's network, timed to arrive the same morning the acquisition makes headlines. Day 4, the divorce petition gets filed with the circuit court. Each move was designed to land before the previous one had finished reverberating. Whitfield asked if Derek wanted to reconsider the sequencing, whether it might be cleaner to file the divorce petition first to establish the legal separation before the financial news became public. Derek said no. He had thought about this carefully. He wanted Camille to understand the full scope of what she had dismissed before she understood the legal implications of having dismissed it. He wanted the Forbes cover to exist in the world, to be seen by her colleagues and her mother and her 60-party guests before any attorney entered the room to explain what it meant for the divorce proceedings. The information had to land first. The law would follow. Whitfield nodded and made a note. He then walked Derek through the licensing non-renewal mechanism. The vendor agreement between Margin Media LLC and Camille's network contained a standard commercial clause allowing either party to decline renewal with 30 days written notice before the quarterly term date. The next term date was 11 days after the Forbes drop. The notice could go out the same morning as the acquisition announcement, and it would be entirely routine on its face, a vendor declining to renew, nothing more, until someone looked up who owned the vendor. Nobody had ever looked up who owned the vendor. Derek left Whitfield's office and drove back to the apartment through the late afternoon traffic on Lakeshore Drive, the city moving past his windows in the amber light of a September evening. He parked and went upstairs and sat at his desk and opened his laptop and pulled up the final draft of the Forbes profile. He read it from the first sentence to the last. Every fact was accurate. Every quote was his. The photograph, taken 3 weeks earlier in his home office, the lake just visible through the window behind him, was exactly right. He approved the final version and closed the laptop. Then he went to the living room. Camille had spent 2 Saturdays arranging the bookshelf, selecting spines for color and proportion, photographing the result twice before posting the version she preferred. The arrangement was still there, unchanged, a careful aesthetic she had built for an audience. Derek reached into the bag he had set by the door and removed the Forbes issue he had been holding since it arrived from the editorial office 3 days prior. He found the right gap in the arrangement between a slate grey hardcover and a cream-coloured spine, and he set the magazine there, open to page 1 of his profile, propped at a slight angle so the cover faced outward. He stepped back and looked at it. It sat among Camille's books the way a fact sits among assumptions, quietly, without announcement, waiting to be seen. He went back to his office and spent the remainder of the evening working. He ate dinner at his desk. He did not mention the magazine to Camille when she came home from a segment taping, and she did not notice it on the shelf. She was on her phone as she moved through the living room, talking to Tasha about the party logistics, her voice carrying the bright, elevated tone she used when she was performing, even in private. Derek heard her laugh twice through the wall. He kept working. On Thursday morning, 3 days before the party, Whitfield sent a single encrypted message confirming that Margin Media LLC had formally notified Hargrove's legal team that the existing data licensing agreement with Camille's network would not survive the transition to new ownership under current vendor terms. The language was standard acquisition boilerplate. It triggered, automatically, a non-renewal notice that would be generated and dispatched to the network on the morning of day 3. The same morning the $67 million acquisition became public knowledge. The first domino was already standing. Derek read the confirmation, closed the message, and returned to the piece he was editing for the post-acquisition launch of the Margin's new editorial division. He worked until 9. He made himself a cup of tea and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the lights below. He thought briefly about the legal pad that had started all of it, the one Camille had photographed and sent to Tasha as evidence of a small man's small dreams. He thought about the number he had written at the top of the 1 million subscriber projection. He thought about what the actual number had come in at. Then he rinsed his cup and went to bed. On Saturday night, he dressed in his good jacket, rode the elevator to the rooftop, and stood at the bar with a glass of sparkling water while 60 people watched his wife announce her new chapter. He listened to every word. He did not flinch. He did not leave early. He stayed until the toast was finished and the room had moved back into its social current. And then he raised his glass one final time and drank the last of it to the bottom. By the time Camille woke up the next morning, the first domino was already falling. Day 1. Tasha's message arrived at 8:47 in the morning. A single iMessage, no text, no caption, no explanation. Just a photograph of a magazine cover shot from what looked like a coffee table, the image slightly angled but perfectly legible. Camille stared at her phone screen for 4 seconds before her brain caught up with her eyes. Then she walked to the living room. The Forbes issue was right where Derek had left it, propped open against her Instagram aesthetic bookshelf, face out, unmissable. She picked it up with both hands. She read the first paragraph standing up. She did not sit down for a long time. Day 2. Camille called Derek's cell phone 4 times. It rang through to voicemail each time, the same calm outgoing message she had heard 1,000 times and never thought anything of. She called again from a different number. Voicemail. She then did something she had never done before. She searched for Derek's attorney. She didn't have the name. She searched through old paperwork until she found a letterhead from 3 years prior, a business matter she had never paid attention to. She called the number. A receptionist answered. Camille asked if Derek Okafor was a client. There was a brief pause. The receptionist confirmed that James Whitfield represented Mr. Okafor and that she could pass along a message. Camille hung up without leaving one. She sat at her kitchen table for 20 minutes and did not move. Day 3. The acquisition announcement hit Chicago Business Journal at 7 in the morning and was picked up by 3 national trade outlets before noon. Hargrove Media Group acquires the Margin in $67 million deal. Derek's name was everywhere. His photograph, the same one from the Forbes cover, the lake in the window behind him, appeared in every article. By 1 in the afternoon, Camille's agent called, not to congratulate her on anything, to tell her that 2 pending brand partnerships, a fintech platform called ClearPath and a wealth management app called Verdant, had both independently sent withdrawal letters within 48 hours of the Forbes drop. Both cited internal brand alignment reviews. The agent's voice was careful and professional and gave away nothing, but he stopped returning Camille's same-day calls after 3:30. Day 4. The divorce petition was served at 9 in the morning by a process server who knocked on the apartment door while Camille was still in her robe. She called her attorney within the hour. The attorney pulled the filing and went quiet for a long moment before explaining that Margin Media LLC, the entity now valued at $67 million, was registered in 2014 under Derek's sole ownership. The marriage occurred in 2016. Under Illinois law, the distinction was, as her attorney chose her words carefully, significant. The initial confidence that had characterized their previous conversations drained out of the call like water through a cracked glass. Camille's attorney said she would need more time to review the full filing before advising next steps. She did not sound optimistic. Day 7. Tasha received the licensing non-renewal notice at her work email at 8:52 in the morning. It was a single-page document from Margin Media LLC's legal counsel, formal and bloodless, stating that the existing data licensing agreement with the network would not be renewed at the upcoming quarterly term date, 11 days hence. Tasha read it. She sat with it for 6 hours. She then forwarded it to Camille without a word of context, no subject line alteration, no explanatory note, nothing. That same afternoon, Camille was called into a meeting with the network's Senior Vice President of Programming. The conference room was quiet when she arrived. The Forbes issue was on the table. Nobody acknowledged it directly. The conversation lasted 19 minutes. When it was over, Money Moves with Camille had been moved from its Tuesday 6 p.m. slot to Saturday morning. Saturday morning, day 9. 3 episodes had now aired without the signature data graphics that had defined the segment's visual authority for 2.5 years. The production team scrambled for replacements, generic stock visuals that looked exactly like what they were. The comment sections noticed, "Where are the good graphics? The segment feels different. What happened to the data?" Camille's Instagram engagement dropped 15% in a single week. She posted twice and received a third of her usual response. The audience could feel something shift without being able to name it. Camille could name it. She just couldn't say it out loud. Day 11. Renee called at 2 in the afternoon, which meant she had just come from Sunday service. Camille could hear the particular quality of her mother's Sunday silence, the kind that settled over her after church like a second perfume, something between peace and judgment. Renee did not ask how Camille was doing. She did not ask about the segment or the divorce filing or the Forbes cover that Camille was certain her mother had seen, because 3 women from her church circle had already sent it to her. Renee asked one question. She asked if Derek was still a good man. Camille said she didn't know what that meant. Renee said she thought Camille did know, baby. Then she hung up first. Camille set her phone down on the counter of the apartment she had repainted and redecorated and reimagined as the first room of her new chapter. The furniture was arranged the way she had planned it. The bookshelf was color-coordinated. The throw pillows were exactly right. Everything in the room was exactly the way she had chosen it, and none of it could undo a single thing she had done. Whitfield called Derek that evening to confirm the formal dissolution meeting had been scheduled for 2 weeks out. Derek said he would be there. He requested that it be conducted in person. Whitfield asked if he wanted to say anything else. Derek said no, he had nothing left to say until it was time to say all of it. Whitfield's conference room was on the 22nd floor, quiet and neutral, the kind of room designed to contain difficult things without absorbing them. A long table, 6 chairs, water glasses already filled. The lake was visible through the window, flat and grey in the late morning light, the same lake Derek had looked at from his home office for 8 years, while the rest of the apartment slept. Derek arrived first. He sat on the near side of the table, his folder in front of him, his hands resting on it with the stillness of a man who had been preparing for this room for a long time. Whitfield sat beside him, portfolio open, pen uncapped. They did not speak. There was nothing left to discuss. Camille arrived 7 minutes later with her attorney, a woman named Patricia Graves, who had built a reputation on high-asset divorce proceedings and had taken this case with the confidence of someone who had not yet done her research. That confidence had visibly eroded over the past 2 weeks. It was still present, professionally maintained, but thin now, like paint on a surface that had started to separate from the wall beneath it. Camille sat down across from Derek. She did not look at him immediately. She looked at her attorney, then at the table, then at the water glass in front of her. She was dressed with precision. The kind of careful presentation a woman makes when she knows she is being watched and wants to control what the watching means. Derek noticed and said nothing. Patricia Graves opened with the valuation argument. She had prepared it thoroughly, a case that the growth of Margin Media LLC during the years of the marriage constituted a marital asset in which Camille held an equitable interest regardless of the pre-marital registration date. She was 3 sentences into her argument when Whitfield opened his portfolio and slid a single document across the table. Illinois Secretary of State, Certificate of Organization, Margin Media LLC, date of formation, September 14, 2014. Patricia Graves looked at the document. She looked at the date. She finished her sentence, but more slowly than she had started it, and when she reached the end, she did not immediately begin another one. The argument had not been refuted by a counter-argument. It had been refuted by a date. The marriage had occurred in March of 2016. The LLC was 18 months older than the wedding. Under Illinois statute, as Whitfield said with the calm of a man reading a weather forecast, the distinction was dispositive. Patricia Graves made a note on her legal pad. She did not look up, and then Camille looked at Derek. It was the first time in 2 weeks their eyes had met directly. The first time, in fact, since the rooftop, when she had avoided his gaze entirely. There was something raw in her face now that the party version of her face had never allowed. She asked him why he never told her. Derek was quiet for a moment. Not because he was deciding whether to answer, because he wanted to answer completely, and completely required care. When he spoke, his voice was the same as it had always been, low, unhurried, without theatre. He said that she had never asked. Not once in 8 years had she sat across from him and asked what he was building behind that closed door. She had assumed, she had photographed his assumptions and sent them to her producer as a joke. He had let her because a man does not stop building because someone has decided not to watch. He told her about the legal pad. He described it precisely. The subscriber models, the retention projections, the revenue scenarios stacked in tiers. He told her that the 1 million subscriber scenario at the top of the page had projected $4.2 million in annual revenue. He told her that the actual number had come in higher. He watched her process this. He watched her understand that the page she had photographed and mocked had been a business plan, not a dream, not a hobby, not a spreadsheet fantasy from a comfortable man with nowhere to go, a plan executed exactly as written. Then he told her about the vendor invoices. He told her that for 2.5 years, her segment, the centerpiece of her brand, the thing she had used to position herself as a woman who understood money, had been licensing its signature data graphics from Margin Media LLC's research division. He told her the quarterly invoice was $8,400. He told her that Tasha's assistant had processed every one of them under a vendor account nobody had ever looked up. He told her that every episode of Money Moves with Camille that had ever used those graphics, every segment she had presented on financial intelligence and economic empowerment, had been built, in part, on research that belonged to the man she told people was comfortable with not doing much. Camille's hand moved toward her water glass and stopped. Derek looked at her steadily and said what he had come to say. He said that she had spent 8 years telling everyone he was comfortable. Like comfortable was the most polite way to say broke and going nowhere. He said that what she didn't know was that comfortable was the only thing he had ever let her see, and that the rest of it was in Forbes. The room was completely silent. Patricia Graves touched Camille's arm. Camille did not move. She was looking at the table now, at her own hands, at something that wasn't in the room at all. the composure she had worn through every Sunday dinner and every rooftop toast and every pivot away from a question about her husband's work had finally run out of surface to cover. Derek pulled his folder toward him. He signed each document with the unhurried precision of a man completing a task he had prepared for. He closed the folder. He slid it toward Whitfield. He stood. He buttoned his jacket, the same jacket from the party. He walked to the elevator at the end of the hall, pressed the button, and stood with his hands at his sides and his face forward, the same stillness he had carried into every room where he had been underestimated. The doors opened, he stepped inside, they closed behind him on everything that room had contained. 18 months is enough time for the truth to finish what it started. Money Moves with Camille did not end with a dramatic cancellation. It ended the way most things end when the foundation underneath them has been quietly removed, through a renewal meeting that produced no renewal. The network scheduled it. Camille arrived prepared, with a presentation and talking points, and the particular energy of a woman who has convinced herself the momentum is still there. She left the building without a contract and without a follow-up call scheduled. The silence that followed was its own answer. She pitched a regional affiliate in Milwaukee 6 weeks later. That meeting did not close. She pitched another market in Indianapolis the month after that. Same result. The personal finance blog came next. The Fontaine Standard launched with an announcement post about returning to her roots and speaking directly to her community. It had 4,000 followers on a strong month. The sponsored posts were for brands her former agent would not have opened the email from. The billboard near the expressway had been replaced with an advertisement for a mattress company. Tasha left the network before the cancellation arrived. She had always known how to read the direction a room was moving, and she moved first, departing with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that staying would only confirm what everyone already suspected. She updated her resume, sent it to 14 contacts, and waited. 4 responded. None of them moved forward into anything concrete. The professional silence that followed her departure said what no reference letter ever needed to say, that her value had always been borrowed from someone else's credibility, and that credibility was gone. Renee stopped hosting Sunday dinners in November without explanation. The table that had held years of pot roast and pointed silences and backhanded blessings simply went dark. Her church circle noted the change. Her daughter did not call to ask about it. In the language of women who have spent a lifetime communicating through implication, going quiet was itself a complete sentence, and everyone who knew Renee Fontaine understood exactly what it said. Derek had already moved on. He left the South Loop apartment cleanly and took a smaller place on the north side. 2 bedrooms, modest square footage, no statement to make to anyone passing the building. The one feature he specified was a window that faced the lake. He got it. He set up his desk in front of it, brought his legal pads and his black coffee habit, and his early mornings, and resumed the only life he had ever actually been living, the one behind the closed door. Margin Media LLC became Okafor Media Group in the first quarter, after the Hargrove close. The $67 million moved without fanfare. $20 million went directly into the Okafor Foundation, a financial literacy initiative operating in 12 Southside Chicago public schools. Curriculum, teacher training, after-school programming, and a scholarship fund that sent its inaugural cohort of 14 students to college the following fall. Derek sat in the 3rd row at the send-off ceremony in a school gymnasium on Halstead, in a folding chair between 2 parents he had never met, and clapped with everyone else. He did not speak. He did not need to. The remainder of the acquisition proceeds settled into investments that Whitfield structured with the same precision he brought to everything, and Derek did not think about the number again in any way that resembled pride. He had never needed the money to feel like himself. In April, at a panel on independent media hosted at a bookstore on the North Side, Derek was introduced after the event to a woman named Simone, a journalist, an essayist, who wrote with the kind of precision that accumulated respect rather than attention. She asked him what he was working on. He told her. She listened to the full answer without the pivot, without the smaller smile, without the hand already reaching for the next conversation. Then she asked a follow-up question. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. Their story belongs to a different telling, but it began the right way, which is the only part of a beginning that matters. And so this is where Derek Okafor's story rests. Not in a conference room, not on a magazine cover, not in $67 million sitting in accounts that will outlast everyone involved. It rests here, at a desk, facing the lake, a man who was never what the people around him decided he was, living the life that was always his, in the quiet he never needed anyone's permission to occupy. Here is what this story is really saying underneath everything else. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person is decide what they are worth before you have bothered to find out what they are building. That decision does not hurt them. It blinds you, and the longer you maintain it, the more catastrophically it will fail you, because the person you dismissed did not stop because you stopped watching. They kept going, they filled legal pads and closed doors and compounded interest, and waited with the patience of someone who always knew the morning was coming. And when it came with a cover story and a $67 million acquisition and a foundation that would change the lives of 14 young people per year who had nothing to do with any of it. That is what quiet builds. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Derek's position? Would you have left that Forbes issue on the shelf and waited for the morning? Or would you have walked away long before it ever came to that? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I read every single one, and if this story moved you, hit the like button before you go. It costs you nothing, and it helps this channel reach more people who deserve to hear stories like this one. If you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment, and because the next story coming to this channel is the kind that will make you want to call someone you know. Derek Okafor sat down at his desk. The lake was silver in the early light. The coffee was black and hot and exactly right. He pulled a fresh legal pad from the drawer, opened it to the first page, uncapped his pen, and began.